On the night of August 27th, 2012, pirates tried to hijack an oil tanker off the coast of Togo, but they were intercepted by the Togolese navy. As the pirates tried to escape, they left the tanker's anchor dragging on the seabed. The anchor damaged the West African gas pipeline, cutting off crucial gas supply to neighboring Ghana. Ghana used natural gas to produce electricity. With that cut off, the power plants could not operate, and that triggered years of power outages and load shedding. Things in this African country were so bad that dumpster, the Ghanaian word for load shedding, became part of the Oxford Dictionary. To address this crisis, Ghana signed agreements with private power companies, which are also known as independent power producers or the IPPs. Ghana added so much electricity to the grid that it led to oversupply, and nothing comes for free. So Ghanaians were paying for electricity that they did not even need. Ultimately, Ghana started borrowing money from banks to pay these power plants, leading to another crisis, a crisis of mounting debt. Now, even though Ghana has plenty of IPPs, load shedding has returned, and these private power companies are threatening to cut off the supply if they are not paid $1 billion. What has happened in Ghana is something that lower and middle income countries have experienced for decades. It's a cycle. Something triggers a power shortfall. The World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and other global bodies then promote the idea of private power producers. Consultants write detailed reports. Foreign investors come rushing in, attracted by the prospect of higher returns. Hundreds of millions of dollars exchange hands. Expensive power plants are built, and in the end, average consumers, people like you and me, are left to foot the bill. And ultimately, this happens. On July 29th, 2024, an old woman in Pakistan jumped into a stormwater drain, taking her own life. Razia Saeed was 65 years old and suffering from hernia. Over several years, she had saved money for a surgical operation. Then one day came the electricity bill, 10,000 Pakistani rupees or around $40 US. This might seem like a small amount, but in a low-income country like Pakistan, this could mean a lot for the poorest segment. Razia could not afford to pay that and decided it was better to end her life than to put her family through financial misery. Her death became a footnote among all the sad things that are happening in Pakistan, where poverty often drives people to the extremes. But this wasn't an ordinary tragedy. It's actually part of a pattern that governments, international financial institutions, and corporations have hidden from all of us. Every few months, the tragedy like Razia's occurs because of expensive electricity. IPPs have taken entire nations hostage. In Pakistan, the government has increased taxes and power tariffs, leading to protest and putting the stability of the entire country at risk. 1/3 of Pakistan's national budget is spent on paying only 24 power companies. The small African country of Zambia faced a debt crisis partly because of IPPs. And Indonesians still cringe when they recall the corruption of billions of dollars during the era of dictator Suharto, whose family members had stakes in these same power plants. This is the story of how an elite group of people from rich countries and a few powerful institutions created a system where few investors make tons of money, all of it extracted from people like you and me. And this is how it all started. In the 1980s, the World Bank decided it was time to promote private enterprise. Communism was on the decline and states were losing control over the economy. Privatization was the buzzword. There was plenty of money floating around in international financial markets. Big Western corporations were looking for avenues to sell their products, such as these power turbines. They needed new customers. As luck would have it, Asian economies were booming at the same time. Consumerism was taking hold. People were buying new homes and spending money on televisions, refrigerators, and air conditioners. There was just one problem. Electricity was in short supply. Countries like Indonesia and the Philippines were experiencing hours-long power outages. On some days in Manila, people did not have any electricity for up to 12 hours a day. Things in Karachi were no different. I know, because I grew up there. The reason for that was lack of power generation capacity. Governments in these developing countries did not have the money to build power plants on their own. One mid-sized power plant can easily cost $400 million. Then someone at the World Bank had a brilliant idea. Hey, we have a solution, they said. Here we have companies in the rich world with a lot of money. Here we have low-income countries which need electricity. Why don't we bring them together? And the World Bank can play the role of a mediator, sort of a guarantor, which makes sure that everything works out smoothly. Since the World Bank gives money to these developing countries anyway, it can exert influence to speed up projects and overcome cumbersome bureaucracies. This seemingly simple solution led to the idea of independent power producers. Hold on, I want to clarify something here. The use of the word independent here is a misnomer. These power plants are very dependent. They are dependent on people paying their bills on time. They are dependent on governments ensuring that those bills are paid. And they are dependent on international arbitration courts to pressurize the governments to ensure that consumers do indeed pay their bills. It's important to understand how we came to the point of relying on the IPPs, to a place where they now technically dictate national budgets. The answer to this lies here, in Chicago. After World War II ended and global trade picked up, the job of producing electricity and then bringing it to our homes and factories fell in the hands of private entrepreneurs. But governments quickly realized that electricity is a basic necessity. People will run fans, use washing machines and store meat in refrigerators even if electricity prices go up. Leaving a commodity like electricity in the hands of a few profiteering companies was a recipe for disaster. So starting in the 1960s, the governments in Europe and elsewhere began nationalizing the power sector, including transmission and distribution wires, which bring electricity to our homes. However, there was a group of economists centered around the University of Chicago's economics department that was not happy with this arrangement. Known as the Chicago Boys and driven by the free market ideology of Milton Friedman, they argued that governments have no job running a business. They vigorously promoted the idea of free markets and private enterprise. And to put their ideas into action, they reached out to this man, Augusto Pinochet, the dictator of Chile. In the 1970s and 80s, everything in the South American country was privatized, from hospitals to power plants and even schools. And it actually worked. Chile's economy prospered, per capita income rose, and there was plenty of electricity for everyone, at least in the cities. Encouraged by this success, these economists and the consultants that they had trained began looking towards East to implement their policies elsewhere, and they narrowed down to this country, Indonesia. Southeast Asia's largest economy, Indonesia, was ruled by Suharto, another dictator like Pinochet. Starting in the early 1990s, Indonesia embarked on a massive drive to build power plants. That was in anticipation of higher economic growth that would require more electricity to run factories and appliances that people are buying. Major electric equipment makers from Mitsubishi in Japan to General Electric in the United States lined up to sell power generation machinery as part of multi-billion-dollar deals. The business of making electricity was so profitable that everyone wanted a piece of the pie. A shopping mall owner, a cinema owner, corrupt officials, everyone signed up to build a power plant. All of Suharto's 6 children had a stake in at least one power plant. And it's not just power plants that were profitable. There was money to be made in the business of supplying fuel that is used to run these power plants. Most of the power plants in operation are thermal based, which means they use oil, gas or coal to generate electricity. Indonesia has plenty of coal reserves. So when it came down to who would supply coal to the largest power plant of its time, the Peyton 1, the contract went to Hashim, brother of Suharto's son-in-law. There was so much corruption involved that a French company, Alstom, even set up a branch in Switzerland exclusively to pay bribes to officials who would issue necessary permits. But why were so many people desperately trying to get their hands on IPPs? What makes them so profitable? The answer to this is a bit technical, but it's a fascinating one. And it has to do with the easy way in which you can make money by getting into the business of power production. Every country needs foreign investment. That money is needed to build dams, highways, and telephone towers. Of course, when a foreign investor, or any investor for that matter, puts in money, they expect a fair return. That return can come in different shapes. A company can have a monopoly to collect toll on a highway it financed, or take the example of telephone companies like T-Mobile or AT&T, which are given access to telephone service subscribers. Before I come to how these IPPs or power plants make money, let's talk a bit about what is foreign investment. When a big international bank like Citi comes to a country, it does a few things. It opens up bank branches, hires people, and then trains them. This last bit, the training part, the transfer of expertise and knowledge, is key here. Take another example of car manufacturers like Toyota. When they start operation in a country, they bring along technology, the know-how of how to nurture vendors who make car parts like doors and gearboxes. These companies really do deserve a good return on their investment. But nothing like this happens when IPPs are built. They import generators and they install them. that's pretty much it. You don't even need a lot of people to run a power plant. Power plants make money by selling electricity. And here comes the catch. Power plants don't sell electricity directly to you and me, the end consumers. The electricity is almost always sold to a government company. In Pakistan, that company is Central Power Purchasing Authority. In Bangladesh, the Power Development Board. And PLN in Indonesia. When the United States, France and other rich nations were promoting the idea of IPPs on behalf of their companies along with the World Bank, they came up with the idea of insulating the power plants from any potential loss. So when power plants sell megawatts to a government agency, they basically say, we have done our part, now it is your job to collect the bills. They literally don't take any risk. As a result of this, government agencies have been saddled with billions of dollars of debt. Even then, these power plants usually demand a return of 17 to 18%. Their agreements have clauses that protect them from any sort of loss. For instance, currency depreciation. Electricity is sold in local currencies, but IPPs say they must be paid in US dollars. So when local currency loses value, governments dig into their meager foreign currency reserves to make up for the difference. Another clause says it is a state's job to arrange oil, gas or coal for the power plants. That's like a Snickers saying, we will make the chocolate bar, but it is government's responsibility to arrange sugar and cocoa. Perhaps the most controversial clause in the agreements of these IPPs is related to the capacity payments. Capacity payment is a fixed amount that governments have to pay these power plants in any case whatsoever, even if they are not producing any electricity. It sounds so stupid, but that is really the case. For instance, during winters when people are not switching on fans or using air conditioners, the demand for electricity goes down. But the contract says the government agency which buys electricity from these independent power producers still has to pay them a certain capacity charge. This charge normally amounts to 40 to 60% of the plant's revenue. This clause has become such a problem for lower and middle income countries that now they are struggling to find money to pay these power plants. In Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nigeria and several other countries, less is being spent on education and health just because these power plants have to be paid, even when they are not producing any electricity. There was indeed a time when developing countries faced the problem of electricity shortage. Now the reverse is true. The business is so profitable that many more power plants have been built. They have added too much excess capacity to our power grids, and no one seems to know what to do about it. But how do these countries get stuck in this vicious cycle again and again, in which they go from having very little electricity to having too much of it? One explanation is corruption. Among the World Bank officials who vigorously promoted the idea of IPPs in the 90s was Ibrahim Elwan, a divisional head at World Bank. Elwan used to live in a modest home in Virginia, United States. But soon after he left the World Bank, his fortune started to grow. He moved into a $1.3 million home in a gated community. In a rare move, the World Bank launched an international investigation into his sources of income. Sure enough, Elwan was named alongside Asif Ali Zardari, Pakistan's president, in a corruption scandal involving the Hub power plant. Elwan had made so much money during his time at the World Bank that he financed construction of a power plant on 100% equity. That means he did not borrow anything from banks, which is very unusual considering a power plant can cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Over the years, characters like Elwan have emerged time and again to pitch the idea of IPPs to corrupt officials so all of them can make money. In Ghana, we see the case of Emery power plant that was promoted by this man, Omar Farouk Zahoor, a convicted swindler who was behind the infamous watch scandal that became one of the reasons why Pakistan's former Prime Minister Imran Khan was put behind bars. The $510 million Emery power plant was overpriced by at least $150 million. It was such a big scandal that it led to removal of Ghana's energy minister. Once these power plants are up and running, the governments are trapped. They have to come up with foreign exchange, mostly US dollars, to pay the debt of these power plants. Because they have sovereign guarantees, which basically means the governments take upon themselves to ensure that the debt is repaid. Zambia, which struggled to pay its foreign debt, owes billions of dollars to these IPPs. Now finally, some countries are pushing back. In Pakistan, the current government is renegotiating the contracts with privately owned power plants. But the question remains, why these IPPs or private power producers are so vigorously promoted in developing countries, while in countries like France and Spain, the business of power production and its supply remains in the hands of the state. I will end this video with this interesting fact. In the beginning I mentioned Chile, the successful model for private sector and IPPs that became foundation for replicating this idea in other countries. Right now, the largest power producer in Chile is Enel, a company owned not by some hedge fund or a business tycoon, but by the Italian government. Thank you for watching this video.